Hey, Dikuya. I'm going to attempt to pronounce that. You can all have a good laugh. That way I'll get all the blood flowing, right? So get somebody coming from the States and attempting a very beautiful, but I got to say, a bit tricky language. So, Atvrđene inovacije a vivo aplikacije. I probably need some more work. But anyway, so as Brian and Andre said, I'm going to stay at a vision level here, but I'm going to try and get a little bit into some of the technical underpinnings of the Red Hat story and give you a little bit of a sense of how some of the concepts beneath buzzwords like containers and microservices, how that all fits together and why that matters, why that's important. So Brian touched a lot on this idea of digital transformation, right? This is what many, not just CIOs, but CEOs around the world, all the regions, and I visit, certainly North America, Latin America, Asia, and many countries here in Europe. I talk to IT folks at different levels within the organization, and this idea of digital transformation is really top of mind for anybody involved, not just in technology, but in business. And, the idea is that software and IT more generally are not just about support functions. It's not just, computers in the back room, in the server room, in the data center that are there helping with support functions like accounting and payroll and keeping track of inventory and so on. Today, software is the heart of many businesses that otherwise seem to have nothing to do with technology, right? If you think about cars, right? Okay, there's mechanical technology in cars, but many car manufacturers compete on the actual software that drives the car, that creates the driving experience for the customer, right? The drivers of the cars. So software is transforming every single business on the planet. There's almost nothing you can think of in terms of just how humans interact and conduct business that can't be improved and in many ways dramatically disrupted with software. And a particular point that I'm trying to get across with this depiction, this diagram here, is this notion of a cycle, right? Of a constant need to do something, see the reaction to that something, adjust based on the reaction, and come back to the beginning, right? So, for the techies in the audience, those of us who have written code or are writing code, I don't anymore, but I've spent my time writing code. We talk about iteration, right? Going around, through a loop over and over and over again. And in the case of digital transformation and the kinds of things happening in the industries that we're talking about here, this notion of trying something and, as they say, fail fast or succeed fast and build on that success is very important. And it's going to be a theme that recurs throughout the story here. So Brian mentioned the idea that, okay, in many different domains, there are many different types of applications, there are many different needs, there are many different drivers that are all pushing toward this same destination, right? This destination of digital transformation. And what I really want to focus in on here is the application itself, right? The application is king, right? We, Red Hat, as an infrastructure company, a company that has built much of our success from the early days on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, the operating system, and really gotten our start at the infrastructure level, we sometimes have to stop and remind ourselves that, hey, it's not just infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. It's infrastructure to make the application that much more powerful, that much more impactful for the business. And whether you're in government, transportation, manufacturing, I know here in Czech Republic there's still a great and strong manufacturing sector. How many folks in the room are from manufacturing-related businesses, industries. A couple, not super many. I know there's still some great car manufacturers here, Skoda, and lots of very high technology, high precision manufacturing, and our software is used in many of those kinds of applications. But take banks, take retailers, many different government ministries are all using around the world Red Hat infrastructure as the basis for their applications. But it's those applications which are very different based on the domain, which are really driving the breadth of capabilities, the breadth of functionality that we build into our infrastructure. But sticking with this idea of applications for a moment, applications today are different, right? They're not like they were 10, 15, even 5 years ago, right? So as this picture might stimulate in your mind, there's certainly an aspect of mobile, right? We've all become much more used to interacting with applications via mobile devices, our phones, our iPads, and so on. But I don't even mean simplistically the fact that there is a new way of interacting as an individual with applications. The very notion of an application has expanded dramatically. An application may span multiple sessions, each of which has a very different kind of interaction. Maybe one time it's with a phone, maybe one time it's with a web page, from home on your laptop. Maybe another time it's with a kiosk at a bank or a retailer. The notion of an application to purchase something or to consume a service may very well involve interaction with a very specific device. Again, think of when you check out at a retailer and your items are automatically scanned and you don't even have to interact with a person to pay. That's part of the application that the retailer is providing that is the basis for that consumer experience. Thinking about applications, right, as IT people, as software developers, as application builders, we need to think in much more expansive and much more inclusive terms of different kinds of means of interaction, different kinds of data being brought into the environment, into a particular interaction, right? The applications are very different. As Brian touched on earlier, right, IT must evolve, and it's not just about the technology. It's not just about putting a cloud infrastructure in place or beginning to use public cloud technologies. There's certainly lots of technological aspects to what must change, but a mindset and a culture must change across both our enterprises, the companies that we work for, and the customers that we're interacting with, right? It's happening anyway. The change and the cultural change is already happening, right? As consumers, I bet everybody in this room has a smartphone and does some amount of their personal banking or retail or even just managing their day via their smartphone. And that is already causing different expectations in our minds as consumers as to what we expect an application to provide, what we expect it to know about us, what data we expect it to be taking into account as it provides a very individualized, a very tailored experience, right? But while we recognize and assert and embrace the fact that this evolution must happen, IT and the culture and the processes must all change, we also recognize that that evolution has to happen sensibly, right? We're not asserting that you should all go throw out all of your old stuff and put in new stuff, right? That, hey, here we are, Red Hat, with all this innovation. Here's a better way of doing things. Just forget about everything and start from scratch. We know that that's not how it works. That's not how enterprises work. That's not how you can succeed in your day jobs. You need to embrace and extend, not rip and replace, right? And as, again, Brian touched on this, many of the analysts have different models, different ways of explaining this evolutionary process, this notion of mode 1 and mode 2 in the case of Gartner, this idea of renovating the core. Renovate meaning just, make new again, but don't throw out, while building incremental capabilities to support newer styles of applications, newer workloads, right? The IDC model talks about the third platform, right? If your initial platform was, mainframes and some of the early workstations, the second round was more client-server. You start to wrap that with the web and start to connect in Internet of Things and many newer technologies and new models. That's not a whole new platform. It is a third platform that sort of layers on top of and continues to make use of some of those older technologies. So that notion of layering, each new sort of generation of technology is what they talk about as their approach and what they recommend as an enterprise's best practice for building out new capabilities for this new world of digital transformation. There are three aspects, three areas that are fundamentally different as you think about what infrastructure and what capabilities, what software and otherwise technology capabilities to put into place to support the world of digital transformation. Architecture, processes, and platforms. So we'll go through each of these in a little more detail. I'll just kind of frame it up with this slide that Brian talked about, right? So if we talk about the what, the how, and the where, right? The architecture, the things that you're building, the what, the processes that you use, how you build things, applications, services, baseline infrastructure to support other applications. And then what you build them on or where, right? That's the platform. And as we'll see, that's what Red Hat is really sort of bringing to the table here. That's what Red Hat is providing and offering you as a basis, as a starting point in your digital transformation journeys. So let's drill into the idea of architecture to start. And I have just 3 slides on this. And what I want to achieve in these 3 slides is to tie together microservices, containers, and the business of digital transformation. So to frame it up, a key requirement for digital transformation, right, for these kinds of disruptive changes that are happening in all of these different industries, is that business needs to get into more of a trial and error approach, right? We can't operate, we can't compete in a world where we make a grand plan once a year or once every couple of years and then set our teams off and they go do things that take a long time and then come back a year, a couple of years, even 6 months later and evaluate. We have to be able to change in much smaller steps. And again, try things, fail fast or succeed fast. When we fail, stop, move on. When we succeed, double down and expand in those areas where we have successes. This is agility, but agility as understood and seen from the perspective of the business person, right? The CEO or the CIO who is answering to the CEO, and not just thinking speeds and feeds, but rather thinking how can he or she help the business be more agile. So if this is fundamentally what we're trying to achieve, we need an architecture that supports that. If we think about applications as they were built 20 years ago, 15 years ago, back when I started my career as a coder building in C and C++, and you compiled an application into a big blob of a binary and you stuck it somewhere for an operations person to deploy and run as this big binary in production. We've obviously come a long way from that. 10, maybe a little more than that years ago, the idea of SOA, services-oriented architecture, came onto the scene and started to decompose architectures into coarse-grained, but nevertheless decoupled modules. And this concept wasn't so revolutionary, right? Modularity, building things as pieces and then putting them together, that's very much something that any of us who have studied engineering have learned as a core best practice. And so what is microservices? I want to demystify the idea of microservices a bit. I mean, some of the technical guys in the room are probably used to some of these very religious arguments, these battles between purists in different sides, different camps who are arguing that, oh, microservice has to be this, or it can't be that, it can't be Java EE, a microservice never needs an app server, things like that. That's all noise. Forget about all that. Microservices is a very simple and elegant concept. It's just taking modularity to the next level. It's just allowing you to architect your applications into finer-grained pieces in order to support the business moving in smaller steps. That's what it's all about. Now, in order to realistically do microservices, in other words, in order to really make it practical to decompose a given application or a given functionality set into these fine-grained elements, you really need containers. You couldn't do this a couple of years ago. You couldn't really do microservices pre-container because you didn't have the ability to have small wrappers around each bit of functionality and be able to move those small bits of functionality around easily on your infrastructure, right? Every single service, every single SOA service had a whole virtualized x86 or whatever server underneath it. It's carrying around all that baggage, all those redundant copies of core operating system functionality. But with containers and the container technology that we, Red Hat, helped drive and are leading contributors to in the open source world and now have at the basis of our entire stack, it allows you to containerize microservices and really manage at scale these very small elements, right? Allowing, again, most importantly to keep in mind, allowing the business to move in smaller steps. So that's it, three slides. Digital transformation, microservices, and the microservices need for containers. So let's look at processes, right? So if you're going to build things differently, it kind of makes sense that the way that people interact, the people doing the building, what they do is going to be different. Many of us in the room, I'm sure, have heard the term DevOps, right? The idea of developers and operations working more closely together, right? Iterating in tighter, faster loops than they have in the past, right? In the old days, developers develop in their sort of ivory tower, get something ready and throw it over the transom, as they say, and some guys on the operations side catch it, try to figure out what to do with it, deploy it into their production infrastructure, and away they go. If there was a problem, there was this very slow back and forth between development and operations. But in the idea of DevOps in the new world, developers and operations get together and they iterate much more quickly. But I would assert that the more important idea here is the fact that now business can get more tightly involved in that loop. So it's not just DevOps, it's BizDevOps. It's the business guys working side by side very closely with the developers, having new business ideas, and having the developers sort of deploy and execute and try the business idea quickly, again, in the spirit of either failing fast or succeeding fast, and stopping and moving on, or doubling down and really going forward with those successes. So BizDevOps is a key change in process in this new world of digital transformation. Now think about development in a cloud-based world with middleware. Now this is my day job, the part of the Red Hat business that I'm responsible for, the developer frameworks and tools and platforms, right? You know, in the old and frankly even current world for a majority of the industry, dealing with middleware is downloading, a big tar file and, exploding it onto your local machine and setting up some configuration files, editing .xml files, and, setting up database connection strings and wiring all these different pieces together and getting going. In the new world, in a PaaS, Platform as a Service, or cloud-based development environment set up for the world of digital transformation, developing with middleware is about clicking services in a web-based dashboard, right, in your platform as a service. If I want to connect two elements together using, say, camel roots from JBoss Fuse, right, I'm using web screens to do that. I'm not having to download all of these different libraries and configure things manually, right? If I want to set up an in-memory data grid, right, I go and I invoke that service that's provided in the underlying cloud infrastructure and that cloud platform and consume that service in a much more drag and drop, much more easy to use and more reliable, because all of the opportunities for human error have been automated away type of approach. And now once I've deployed applications in this cloud-based digital transformation environment, right, many of the things that the operations guys had to do manually in the past are now automated. So with our OpenShift technology as the container platform, using the Kubernetes orchestration open source technology from Google. I know we have Google folks in the room here. Thank you for being a sponsor. We're very, Red Hat is one of the main contributors to Kubernetes, and that orchestration technology is what allows the automation of scaling as different demand, different load on different parts of the application or services requires additional capacity. And I won't go through all of the ways that Red Hat technologies support this type of process, but if you think about now how software-defined, whether it's software-defined networking, software-defined various aspects of the underlying infrastructure, such as software-defined storage as provided by our Red Hat storage technology. This allows, again, that sort of automation of the moving and expansion and contraction of capacity in response to changes in the overarching demand on that application. And the last example of process I'll talk about here is the notion of the citizen developer, right? The business person, when I was talking about biz DevOps before, right? So it's one thing for the business guy to sit down next to a developer and talk about business ideas and then have that developer go write up the code. But now imagine that business person sitting directly at a screen, not having to write Java per se, but being able to manipulate workflows, being able to manipulate tasks and dependencies and so on without even having to have the developer sitting there next to him or her, right? And that's the vision. That's what is envisioned by Red Hat JBoss BPM suite and other related technologies that are about supporting the idea of the citizen developer. So I want to take a quick moment to highlight at least one very interesting example customer within Red Hat's great portfolio of successes here. Avianca is one of the oldest airlines in the world. They're based in South America. Dominate a lot of the air traffic in the Latin American world. And over the last 4 or 5 years, they have been on a journey with Red Hat. They started with Red Hat Linux, as many Red Hat customers have. They added some of the core middleware technologies, JBoss Enterprise Application Platform, our app server, JBoss Fuse, and integration technology. And over the years, have built up not just a couple of applications here and there, but a whole infrastructure based on an approach that is very aligned with this idea of digital transformation that we've been talking about here, right? Where software really is the core, one of their core differentiators compared to their competitors. And so they've set up, a backbone using JBoss Fuse to integrate the many different technologies. They keep acquiring new airlines, and as they add the new booking systems, the new traffic management systems, they're using that backbone created with JBoss Fuse as the way to integrate all of these new systems together and have it all come together as quickly as possible. We all in IT know how hard it is to integrate a new system. Doesn't happen overnight. But if you have the right architecture and the right infrastructure in place to support it, it's the difference between weeks or months versus months and years. And they've recently added JBoss BPM, with that idea of allowing their business analysts to be able to more directly make changes into the various workflows, right? So they're, again, stepping along with us in our vision and our idea of how the journey can unfold for at least one example company and domain. So let's talk about platforms and what Red Hat is really bringing forward to help you on various journeys of a similar nature, right? So we'll talk about platforms here. As Brian talked about, our whole model is about embracing and harnessing and capturing the innovation that's generated in the world of open source. I'm sure many of the developers in the room are participating in one way or another with various open source projects and have some sense of the vibrancy, the agility, the speed with which innovation happens in the open source world. Now, the flip side of all that chaotic, unbridled, crazy innovation that's happening out there is that if an enterprise were to just sort of try to grab that and use it in its raw state, it would be a very expensive and very difficult proposition, right? If you imagine taking a particular open source project and trying to bet your business on it, well, that project is changing every day, literally, right? And if the enterprise doesn't have the time or the resources to keep up with those changes and manage the incorporation of those changes in a way that's safe and low risk and secure and all those consistent with all those other concerns of an enterprise business, it's a losing proposition. But with Red Hat, what we're doing is we're taking all of that craziness of the open source world and productizing it, hardening it, giving it a guaranteed life cycle so that that you'll be able to continue patching and rebuilding and fixing a particular piece of open source technology in your infrastructure for as long as you need. And for a number of years, Brian talked about the evolution of how we arrived at each of these successive types of environments or footprints, as we call them. We've now reached a point where it's pretty clear and straightforward that what Red Hat is all about is open hybrid cloud. Hybrid meaning we know that your environments have some old stuff, some new stuff, some virtualized, some public, some private. And our job, what we're trying to achieve by design in everything that we offer the market, is to make the world seamless across those four underlying footprints. And the process to get there, to get to that seamless world, is straightforward. There's work. I don't want to trivialize it, but there's a very straightforward path of standardizing certain kinds of components, virtualizing wherever possible. The more things are virtualized, right, whether it's virtual servers, whether it's virtualized storage, the easier it is to manipulate them automatically. And that takes us to the third step, automate, right? Once things are standardized and virtualized, it becomes much easier to find opportunities within your infrastructure to automate, let's say, addition of capacity, the automated bringing up of new nodes in the underlying infrastructure, the automatic sort of deployment of new servers in a cluster, right? And then the most recent and currently the sort of the apex of this journey really is containerizing. The more of your applications and services that you can put into containers and manipulate, manage, deploy, observe as containers in your infrastructure, the more sort of safe, secure, easy to expand, easy to adapt your whole infrastructure and set of applications will be. Red Hat uniquely offers the entire stack, right? All the core elements you need from the bottoms up to create the infrastructure for this environment and the platforms with which to develop your applications in this environment, right? So at the sort of bottom of the stack, if you will, the foundation, the rock-solid, important piece that you need to build on certainly is all built around Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the core containerization technologies that I've been touching on throughout the conversation here. complemented by virtualization, storage, right, and various aspects of putting cloud infrastructure inside your own data center. Above that, you could think of it really as the centerpiece of the whole Red Hat offering is the container platform, today manifested in Red Hat OpenShift. And I'll go through in a little more detail what that means in a moment, but that container platform really is that sort of bridge between those foundational capabilities provided by the operating system and virtualization and the things that the developer needs to build applications. And then, of course, the top of the stack, those things that the application developer is using on a day-to-day basis, that's our Red Hat JBoss Middleware, right? Founded 10 years ago on JBoss itself, the app server, which we now refer to as JBoss EAP, complemented by integration, in-memory data grid, data virtualization, full stack all the way on up to business process management, enabling the citizen developer. So let's walk through what the development cycle looks like using these technologies, using the Red Hat stack in an approach that embodies some of the concepts I've touched on here, right? So the developer using Red Hat OpenShift Container Local, meaning a local version of OpenShift running on your laptop, so you can do that initial development or the sort of the isolated development of individual services or components, using whatever of the JBoss middleware, as well as other non-Red Hat technologies that the developer is using in his or her development. It may include open source projects that we haven't productized or that are productized by other vendors, etc. We recognize that there's a heterogeneous environment out there. We certainly believe in the very comprehensive suite of things that we offer, but there will be others, right? That's happening, on the developer's laptop, right? Then soon after that, the developer is having to integrate those individual services with other services, perhaps built by other developers, perhaps already up and running in production, etc. But there's that sort of integration and testing stage, right? And that's where we're using Red Hat OpenShift Container Lab, right? Which is still OpenShift, same underlying deployment machinery, but now employing some of the collaboration capabilities, allowing multiple developers to work seamlessly together. And then, when it's time to actually go deploy a new service into production, again, are we going to fail fast? Are we going to succeed fast, etc.? Right? You're still using OpenShift, seamless, same environment that developers working in, both as an individual, as a small group, and then working with ops to deploy and run. And now we combine OpenShift Container Platform with Red Hat Cloud Forms, which is the management capability to monitor what services are running there, at what capacity, what are the clusters looking like, when do clusters get expanded, contracted, etc. And all that together, right, if you think of all those steps, right, that really is, in a nutshell, Red Hat technologies, Red Hat infrastructure, Red Hat application development coming together to enable enterprises to develop in the biz DevOps way for digital transformation. So a couple other quick notes here. In addition to products, software products, again, is in my day job managing the middleware products, I think products all the time, and as Red Hat, we often have to stop and remember that the value proposition to our customers is much broader than just the products, right? It's the surrounding services, right? So things like, we have a broad base of consulting experts around the world that can get you started in how do I use JBoss Fuse? How do I set up an in-memory data grid? How do I create an infrastructure as a service like Amazon inside my data center using OpenStack, right? So we have the services that enable you to do that. But we also certify and test our software with many different underlying hardware platforms, with many different complementary software pieces and so on. So the certification is a very important aspect as well. Training, offer a wide range of classes to come and get educated on everything from the very bottom of the stack to BPM, and of course support. Part of what you're getting from Red Hat with our productization of open source technologies. We depend on a deep ecosystem of partners, a few of them listed here, a few certainly are sponsors of today's event and have booths outside, so definitely encourage you to talk to our sponsors and get a better sense of how we all work together and how all the pieces fit together. You know, just a little bit of chest beating. We have, as I mentioned earlier with the Avianca example, we have a really wide as well as deep portfolio of success stories around the world, you know, in many different verticals, such as, you know, airlines, telecommunications, healthcare. We're in literally 100% of the Fortune 500 around the world of those respective types of customers. So let me end with a quick summarizing thought. Right, as Brian and I have both tried to emphasize, the core thing that Red Hat is doing is harnessing the creative power, the community-powered innovation of the open source community, taking all that wild and interesting and disruptive and sort of literally world-changing innovation that's happening in the open source world and turning it into products that you can depend on, that you can build and run, right? A multi-billion-dollar or multi-hundred million, whatever's the right scale for your enterprise, but allow you to successfully run and compete in your respective industries, you know, depending on battle-hardened, well-tested, secure, reliable, dependable software. That's what we're all about. And we encourage you to have conversations with our folks here today, learn more. We'd love to welcome you, you know, to our family and work with you, partner with you, and join you in your journeys to digital transformation. So, dziękuję. Enjoy the day.